dating someone doesn't mean that you have to do what that person says. So talking with your teen about saying, no, I don't want to do that, right, is also important, because just because they're dating someone, just because they're friends with someone, just because they're married to someone, doesn't mean they have to do whatever the partner wants to do.
It's interesting because when we tell them, like, no, you don't have to, even if you're married, you don't have to, it kind of blows their mind. They're like, what? Like, I thought that was a thing. And we're like, no, like, what if you were in an argument? What if you didn't want to give that person a kiss and they were trying to, like, give you a kiss to end the argument and you weren't feeling good about it yet? Because that happens a lot, right? And they're like, oh yeah, you're right, that does make sense. So it's like, this is needed every single time. Okay, boundaries. So we have two main types of boundaries. There are other boundaries too, like spiritual and things like that, but you can kind of boil it down to physical and emotional boundaries. Kids understand physical boundaries pretty easily, right? You ask them like, like what's something that you're comfortable with, like are you a hug person or not a hug person, right? And they usually know that about themselves. Emotional boundaries are more complicated, right? They're like about, how much of yourself do you share with somebody and like at what point in the relationship. So this is one that is more difficult to teach, but this is another one where modeling is really important, right? If your child's asking you a question that you feel uncomfortable answering, like say, that's something that usually we don't talk about with other people, or maybe they're oversharing something that like that might not be an appropriate thing to say in a classroom. You can talk to them about, like, that's really something that we only talk about within, with somebody who's really trusted in this certain type of situation, and that's not something that we talk about in a classroom. Boundaries are different for different people, right? So that's something that people have a hard time understanding, is like, just because I'm okay with this, then everyone else should be, right? So we hear this a lot with like emotional abuse. Like somebody will do something that's really harmful, really hurtful, and then you go and tell them like, I really was uncomfortable with this, and they dismiss it, like, that doesn't bother me, like, you're overreacting, right? That shouldn't bother you. So it's really important to validate people when they're, like your child, when they're telling you, like, this is something that hurt my feelings. Like, yeah, that sounds really hurtful. That sounds really painful. Versus telling them, like, stop crying about it, suck it up, it's not that big of a deal. Boundaries also change depending on, the other person that you're with, where you are, right? So we tell kids, like, you might, like to give your mom a hug and a kiss at home before bed, but if she showed up here in the classroom and she was trying to give you a hug and a kiss in front of everyone, a lot of people would be really embarrassed by that, and they're all like, yeah, it's so embarrassing. So you can talk about that, right? So it's okay for your boundaries to change. It's okay to, like maybe when they're older, maybe holding hands is something that you're comfortable doing, when you're in the dark movie theater and like you're not comfortable with it, elsewhere. Or like for a lot of kids who have sensory issues, right? Maybe they just don't like holding hands at all. Maybe they just don't like having, their partner put their arm around their shoulder, and that's okay. They don't have to do that. Relationships don't require that, right? So they don't have to do something that makes them uncomfortable. And then the context and their mood, right? So just because you're fine giving your partner a hug and a kiss when you're like happy to see them, doesn't mean that you want to if they've just hurt you, right? And it's okay to boundaries are flexible. Same, opposite, like if their partner is upset with them, like letting them know, like they might not want, or you can start with their siblings, right? That's always easiest to teach these things because it's like they're in the house, right? Or with yourself, having a bad day or she's having a bad day, like this isn't the time for that. So you can do that in the moment, like modeling, within your family, but then you could also role play examples of this. So if it's, like if your child's having a lot of anxiety about dating, first kiss is like, how do I know if it's the right time? How do I, know whether this is appropriate or not? You can talk, like role play, like how would you ask? What would you say? What kind of, like, is that something you would do in front of other people or just, like when you're alone together? All right.
And so it's also important when we talk about relationships with teens to kind of know what is an appropriate way for you to treat your partner in general and what's not an appropriate way for your partner to treat you, right? So we want to talk about, you want to talk with your teens about like, what do unhealthy relationships look like? What do disrespectful relationships look like? And also, what do healthy relationships look like? How do you show someone that you're respecting them, right? And so these are kind of just like very basic examples of healthy relationships versus unhealthy relationships. So the person trusts you and believes you, they listen to what you say, versus the person does not trust you and tries and makes your decisions for you, right? We know that in basic relationship violence, often partners will try and control other partners. They'll make decisions about where they go, what they wear, who they see, who they talk to, what they eat, all these different things, what they spend their money on. So we want to make sure that our teens are in relationships where their decisions are being respected, right? So so you could ask your teen, does your partner like trust you? Do they make choices for you? Are they trying to get you to do one thing when you don't want to do that? So in a healthy relationship, the person will show kindness and compassion. In an unhealthy relationship, that person is mean or is rude to you or makes you feel bad about yourself or makes you feel ashamed or says mean things to you. Right? In a healthy relationship, the person treats you with respect and makes you feel good about yourself. Kind of same thing on the unhealthy relationship, the person bullies you or makes you feel bad about yourself or criticizes you or is always saying negative things about you. In a healthy relationship, the person will understand your boundaries and will listen to you. In an unhealthy relationship, the person won't care about your boundaries or your feelings. So they might try and push boundaries by saying, no, I was just teasing you, I was just joking around, you're so sensitive, like Taylor was talking about earlier. They may not ask for consent. They may just hold your hand or they may just kiss you, right? So talking with your teen about these are the kinds of things that are appropriate in a relationship. It's healthy for you to listen and for you to care about your partner. And it's not healthy if your partner doesn't listen to you or doesn't care about you, right? Or makes your decisions for you. So talking to them about what is respect in relationships, how do we show respect, and how do we know when there isn't respect? What kind of things happen in a relationship where there isn't respect, where it's not healthy? Right, so kind of giving them examples of, say, this is how we show respect in relationships, this isn't respect in relationships. So letting them know that just because you're in a relationship with that person and that person is supposed to care about you, doesn't mean that always happens sometimes. And so talking with them about what might unhealthy relationships look like? What does that feel like? So they are kind of aware of maybe identifying those things in their own relationships.
Red flags to look for. Sarah's kind of talked about this, but basically they're jealous, possessive, so they might be constantly asking you like where you were, what you were doing. Maybe you're out with friends, but they're like texting you the whole time. If you don't respond back within a certain, acceptable number of minutes, they're, pouting and angry. Maybe your teen has like a mix of friends who identify as male and female, and their partner is like real jealous and controlling around like, you shouldn't be hanging out, with this friend if I'm not there, or maybe they like tag along everywhere that your teen is going. So they go out for, to the movies with a group of friends, and their partner is always, going to those things, and they don't ever have any alone time. Oftentimes, in the beginning of relationships, people just really enjoy spending time together. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's abusive, but it's definitely a red flag to look for, because if, some of these other things are going along where, what if your teen said, I really just want to spend some time with these friends, I'll see you tomorrow. If their partner then got mad at them for saying that, then that would be a problem, right? So that's something to be aware of. If you notice behavioral or personality changes if you're in your teen, so certain behavioral changes might indicate that their partner's trying to control their behavior, right? If they have this favorite outfit that they wear all the time and then they suddenly just don't wear it anymore, that's something to ask about, because maybe their partner criticized their appearance, right? Or told them that that skirt was too short, or something along those lines, and they don't want them wearing that around or out of the house again. Other personality changes, like becoming more withdrawn than usual, or more moody than usual, or more self-conscious, having more anxiety than usual, anything like that. Maybe sleeping a lot more or sleeping a lot less. Those can all be signs. Anything that's like a disruption from their typical pattern. And of course, a lot of things can account for that. So that's why this is like a red flag warning sign. It doesn't mean that they're being abused in a relationship, but it's something to start asking more questions about. If they give up things that used to be important to them, so maybe they're really involved in some sort of club or a sport or extracurricular activity, and they stop doing it so that they can spend more time with that person, that's a red flag as well. If they spend less time with their friends and family, it could be that their partner is being possessive. It could also mean that they're trying to isolate them by speaking negatively and trying to cause rifts between them and their friends. They might be going and saying, I don't know if this friend is such a good influence for you. I don't like who you are around them. And they're trying to kind of remove your teen from their social support. If they seem to be really worried about upsetting their partner, so not typical just beginning dating, I'm worried about asking this person out. This is more of I don't know if they would like this. They're really concerned with pleasing this person, making them happy. They seem to tiptoe around them. A really big red flag is if they speak differently to their friends, and then when their partner's in the room, they have a drastic shift in their body language, their tone, and they seem more anxious. If they're apologizing or making excuses for their partner's behavior, if they maybe share a lot of information with you and then all of a sudden you get really secretive, right? That could mean that something happened, and they don't want to tell you about it because they they're trying to justify it in their own head, and they're trying they don't want to justify it to you. They know that it might be something that you're concerned about. And of course, if they have bruises, injuries, anything that they're trying to cover up, or they can't explain, or maybe they try to explain it but something just kind of sounds off about it. Right. Can you think of any others? I mean, there are a million of these.
Yeah, and so a lot of these, these things may not be like as an isolated incident, may not be like abuse. We kind of define abuse as an intentional pattern of behavior designed to maintain or gain power and control over someone else, right? So abuse is a really specific thing. It's done intentionally, it's done with purpose, and so it's not an accident. Abuse isn't an accident, So talking about, you're gonna look for like patterns of behavior. If your teens experience multiple things of this, that might be a really big indicator that something's going on, right? So we don't need to say just because your child's partner calls or texts or a lot, doesn't mean that anything's wrong necessarily, but there might also be a good conversation about boundaries. When is it appropriate for you to talk to your partner? When would you like to talk to your partner? 3 a.m. in the morning may not be the best time to have a phone call. So talking with your teen about setting boundaries, about what does it look like talking with your partner that you're dating, right? So basically, what we know is abuse is done intentionally, and it generally occurs over time and through a pattern of behaviors, right? So that's just an important thing to like notice and pay attention to. Are things happening a lot that are kind of falling into these kind of things where your child's changing, they're feeling scared or afraid, or their moods drastically change? Just things to look out and kind of be aware of. So now we're going to talk a little bit about social media and the internet, because as the years go by, we just get more and more connected to each other, but through more and more distance, right? So it's important to be able to talk to your teen about what does internet safety look like? How can we make sure that we're being as safe as possible online, right? And so this acronym, Play It Safe, I adapted from a source, but basically it's kind of a summary of internet and social media safety. So P for personal information. So talking with your teen about what is appropriate information to share online, right? So your first name may be okay, but you may not want to share your address or your social security number or your phone number or your last name, right? So talking about what information is okay to share versus what information do we want to keep private, right? And then if somebody asks for your personal information, letting somebody know. Saying, so if somebody asks for where you live or asks for your phone number, let me know so that I can help. We want to make sure that communication between teens and parents stays open. So that your teen is comfortable going to you and saying, hey, this happened, I don't know what to tell you.
Personal information, like it can be, things like your address, things like that, but also a major risk factor for like people targeting youth is youth who have something going on at home and they post about it on social media. So if they, like post about fights with their parents and things like that, some of that's common, but that's just kind of a risk factor for somebody coming in and like, you don't need your parents like, I'll be your person, like I'll swoop in and be the one for you to, like, the shoulder to cry on.
Yeah. The A for attachment, so be cautious before opening anything that somebody sends you. If you don't know what it is, if you don't know who the sender is, talking to someone about before you open it, because that's a lot of viruses get spread is through opening attachments. So saying if you get an email and it's from somebody you don't know and you don't know what it's about, don't open it, right? Why your feelings are important. So if something happens online, if somebody says something, if somebody posts something and it bothers you, that's okay. We don't have to pretend that things are fine. It's okay to have feelings, and it's important to let somebody know about it so they can help you with it. You don't have to keep things inside, right? It's okay to acknowledge that this hurt me. I for information, not everything online is going to be true. So checking with an adult if something comes up that you have doubts about, right? So making sure your teen knows that just because you read it doesn't mean that's how things actually are. And if they're not sure, that's okay to go and ask. It's okay to go and check with somebody else, to go and check a reputable source like an encyclopedia or something like that. T for take breaks. It's always important to disconnect yourself from internet electronics, so making sure that breaks are being taken, whether that's through you have 30 minutes online at night, or that's through you can do this many things, right? So making sure that breaks are being taken and that your teen isn't staying tied to the computer screen, because not only can that affect their social being, it can also affect things like vision, posture, things like that. Spending money online, so making sure that your teen knows that you can't buy things online without permission. It's becoming very easy to buy things online. I accidentally bought HBO for my Amazon Prime accidentally, because I thought I would have to put in a card number, but I just hit buy, and then I accidentally ended up with HBO. It's okay though, I like it. But making sure that they don't spend money online without your permission. So we're making sure that you know what they're spending their money on, right? Act politely, so don't say something to someone online that you wouldn't say in person, right? We all want to be treated with respect, and so it's important that just because you're on a computer and the person can't see you or know who you are, that doesn't mean that we get to be rude to people, right? So making sure that they know that there is still a standard of respect online. You still need to act appropriately and politely. Friends online should stay online, so it's so if they meet a friend online and they want to go out with them, making sure that you know who that person is, you know they're a real person, you know who they say they are, so your team doesn't just go and meet up with someone they met online, right? So always being aware of who your teen's friends are online, kind of knowing what groups they're in, what social media sites they use, and making sure that you're aware of, who their friends are in real life as well. So getting an idea for who they're talking to, who they're messaging, what kind of things they're talking about, just a good thing to be aware of. And then enjoy yourself, right? The internet is full of vast opportunities, vast possibilities. Not all of the internet is toxic or bad, right? So being able to have fun on the internet and not think of it as this burden that you have to carry, or this place where I get bullied or people sending mean things to me. Try to find fun things about the internet, fun, safe things that your teen can enjoy at home.
Now we're out of time since we started late, so I'm going to go over these real quick. So how to help as a parent if your child is in an unhealthy or abusive relationship. So it's really important to be educated yourself about resources in the area, and then also like the dynamics of abuse, because it can be really useful, when like people are saying, for victims in general, when they're saying things that are really victim blaming about themselves, I should have known, I should have, done this or that. You being guarded with the facts so that you can say, that's not true. Like, this is what happened. The emotional abuse works this way. So it's not your fault, is really important. Encourage your child to talk about their feelings related to their relationship. When people go through trauma, if they try to avoid that feeling, shove it down, not deal with it, it really contributes to their later development of things like PTSD or depression, things like that, anxiety disorders. Be supportive and non-judgmental. So they may have made decisions that were against your rules, or that you, with your adult brain, like you see what they did and you're like, why did you do that? But in the moment when you are asking them those why questions, they don't know the answers to those. And why questions come across as very judgmental, right? They don't know how to explain themselves to you, and they are feeling judged by you, which means they're probably not gonna then share much, right? So instead saying, things like, this is really tough, and I'm really glad that you're safe now, I want to be there for you, like, let's talk about this. Let them know that you love them and want them to be safe. Talk about the behaviors that their partner used that you didn't like versus the person. So saying like, I don't like, that this person texts you constantly. I'm worried about what, XYZ, versus saying, they text you all the time. Like, they're so needy, they're so possessive, they. That's gonna make your child or teen really get defensive, and they might block you out and not want to talk to you about it. offer solutions, like maybe you don't feel comfortable talking to me about it, like who can you talk to? Like, can I get you, a counselor? Is there a school counselor? What are the resources in the area? What would make you feel comfortable? Avoid ultimatums. At like as much as you can, even though you might be really afraid and really want them to do, like end this relationship. You saying like you're banned from seeing this person, like you may never speak to them again, things like that. Most of the time teens hear that and they stomp their feet and dig in and try even harder, right? So even though like it can be really scary, you really want them to be safe, just know that like being supportive and trying to give them other solutions and like letting them have as much control as possible is going to be more effective. Also knowing that like ending that relationship can be dangerous. So like they might be like aware of their situation and like know how to kind of appease their abusive partner. And so if they, choose to handle things like in one way instead of the other, they might be like the expert of their situation. Decide on next steps together. That's kind of the same as avoiding ultimatums. But if you believe that your child is in danger, of course call the police. And that's really not you giving an ultimatum, that's you being a protective parent and deciding like this has gone too far, like this is a dangerous situation and I need to do something about it. This was a cool quote that I found. ChangingMindsNow.org is really awesome. It talks a lot about the impact of trauma on the brains of children. So if you want more information about that, definitely check out this website. It says adults can help to prevent or reverse the effects of trauma through everyday gestures like listening, celebrating, comforting, inspiring, and collaborating with young people. And of course, it's not just about the kids. These topics can be really difficult for any family, but especially if your child faces additional barriers. So you really need support during that time as well. So consider like, what does your self-care routine look like? And a lot of times, like talking to parents about self-care, they're like, well, I don't have time for any of that, or like it's expensive. I can't go,